What happens when one of the most esteemed legends in Hollywood walks into what he believes is a regular interview, only to be trapped in a televised trap? Ron Howard, the genius behind Apollo 13, a beautiful mind, and Rush walked onto the set of The View, expecting to talk shop about filmmaking. But instead, he found himself in a verbal sparring match with Joy Behar, a woman who would poke, prod, and twist logic until the most zen director in Hollywood snapped. So the question stands, how far do you push a nice guy until he blows? This is the unedited story of the moment the stoic genius finally lost his cool on national television. One of the most awkward and cringeworthy segments of all time. Before we dive into the footage, do make sure to hit that subscribe button and smash that bell so you're not only one of the first to see this, but you'll get it once the interview is out. After you see the footage, leave a comment and tell me whether you think ambush interviews are ever justified or has daytime television gone too far. Behind the scenes at ABC Studios, the mood was one of typical pre-show chaos. In the green room, sitting calmly and looking over his talking points prepared by his publicist, sat Ron Howard. Today should be nothing but a victory lap, he thought, as the film he directed was already garnering significant Oscar buzz, and it centered on the heart of small-town America. Ron Howard, the man who transformed from child actor Opie Taylor into a master filmmaker over 50 years ago, has dealt with the press for decades. Compared to the $100 million movies that Ron Howard directed, an interview on The View should have been nothing. That was until it wasn't. Mr. Howard, they are ready for you now. Ron, with the same calm he displays when directing a massive production, followed a production assistant down a long hallway and into a labyrinth of hundreds of photos of stars that lined the walls. As he neared the soundstage, the live audience began roaring with applause. The cameras came on, and as the cameras flipped, Ron thought, this just doesn't feel right. Was it the heat, or was it the sheer excitement in the eyes of the interviewers standing in front of him, seated at the semicircular table? The words of Whoopi Goldberg echoed through the speakers of the television, her introduction of Ron Howard booming with prestige. He's been a part of the living rooms in homes across the world for over 50 years, starting out as the most famous child actor on television, and today is one of the most decorated filmmakers in Hollywood history. Ladies and gentlemen, it is my pleasure to welcome Ron Howard. Ron waved to the live audience and walked onto the set, smiling genuinely as he shook hands with the panel, before settling into the warm seat. Whoopi led this segment with genuine warmth. Mr. Howard, it is an absolute pleasure to have you here. I have been a fan since the Andy Griffith days, she said, beaming. This should have been a classic celebratory Hollywood interview with all of the talk of the new movie and the upcoming award season. But what you don't know is behind the friendly face of the panelists sat Joy Behar, already sharpening her words with what would soon turn into a barrage of invasive and manipulative questions. And what she said next not only threw the interview off the rails, but it changed the entire landscape of how people view the great Ron Howard. Thanks, Whoopi, said Ron, with that earnest Midwestern drawl that has made him a household name for years now. Those really were the days. It feels like I grew up right before the whole country, and I wouldn't trade that for anything. The jovial mood continued as Sarah Haynes leaned forward, smiling broadly. Your new movie is all about community and how people come together. What was the inspiration for it? What drew you to this particular story? Ron's face lit up. This was what he was here for, his craft, the message and heart of this new movie. You know, Sarah, he began, in the world today, so divided and polarized, I think we have to remind ourselves just how much we really have in common. This story is all about that kind of America, the America that I grew up in, where neighbors knew and helped one another, no matter what their background was or who they voted for. It was a call for unity, but to Joy Behar, it was an opening. That's interesting, Ron, Joy said, cutting across his answer. There was a sharp edge to her voice as she continued, and even her fellow co-hosts shifted in their seats. You're looking back at the America you grew up in as though it was some perfect paradise, but was that the era of segregation? Was that the time when women couldn't even open a bank account? Was that an America where if you weren't white, straight, and Christian, you were basically considered less than human? The atmosphere in the studio had plummeted from warm to ice cold, and the studio audience was silent. Ron looked at Joy with a flicker of disbelief, momentarily forgetting the media training he'd endured over his years. How do you explain and defend a movie about kindness in the face of an accusation that you're glorifying a racist and sexist past? I certainly don't want it to sound like I'm romanticizing the past, Joy, Ron responded. Every era had its huge, deep problems, and I think we can all agree that we have certainly come a long way as a society. But Joy wasn't seeking an agreement, she wanted a fight. Progress that people like you fought tooth and nail against, she countered at full volume. Let's cut the bull here, Ron. Who are you really trying to appeal to when you talk about the good old days? Aren't you really saying that things were better back then because white, male power was still completely unchecked? A collective gasp ran through the studio. In the wings, Ron's publicist, presumably terrified, was surely already on the phone to a lawyer and threatening to kill the feed. This was no longer a movie promotion. This was a trial. I think there's a serious misunderstanding here, Ron stated. He remained calm, and a flicker of confusion was slowly replacing the amusement on his face. I was referring only to the community spirit involved, not to anything political. This is a story about basic humanity. However, as Ron tried to steer the conversation back to the shallow waters of a celebrity chat, it was clear that Joy had just begun. You have to hear what happened when the accusations become even more personal. Stay tuned. Leaning back, Joy watched with a self-satisfied smile as her trap sprung shut. Everything is political, Ron, she stated blandly, especially when someone of your standing starts with the nostalgia about the good old days. You can't separate art and politics, and you certainly can't separate your perfect childhood from the realities of the suffering that occurred during it. Sonny Hostin attempted to intervene, likely seeing the interview spiraling out of control, but Joy interrupted her. No, let him answer. I'm interested in knowing whether or not Ron Howard believed the civil rights movement was simply a group of people upset about the good old days he so dearly misses. At this point, you have to ask yourself, is this an interview or a trial? Ron's jaw tightened, barely an inch. A slight twitch in a 50-year Hollywood career, an instinctual attempt to conceal an emotion that threatened to breach the wall of a lifelong performance. Years of careful PR training were not enough to prepare him for a question that directly challenged the integrity of his entire being, not a critique of his work, but a targeted, inflammatory attack aimed to elicit a negative response. Joy, with all due respect, that is a gross mischaracterization, and not at all something that I ever said. He responded slowly and in a lower tone than before. I've spent my entire life supporting civil rights, women's rights, and equality. My films reflect that. But Joy wasn't concerned with a resume. She was looking for cracks in the facade. Have they? She pressed, seeming to take pleasure in watching the seasoned director sweat under the harsh studio lights. Or have they simply been feel-good movies that allow certain audiences to sleep soundly in their beds at night, while not fundamentally changing a thing? The rest of the hosts stared in shocked silence. Even the usually unflappable Whoopi Goldberg seemed unnerved by Joy's attack dog approach. Ron took a slow, deep breath and reached into his considerable reservoir of years in the public eye in an attempt to steer the conversation back to rational thought. I believe if you examine the entire body of my work, from A Beautiful Mind to 13 Lives, you will see stories that celebrate the indomitable spirit of human beings and that remind us what happens when we work together to overcome the impossible. These are not partisan statements, Joy. These are human statements. Human statements? Joy repeated acidly. These are nothing more than code words used by people who are too afraid of the truth and too complacent to stir the pot. They are the ultimate expression of privilege, Ron. You get the luxury of making your movies about the wonderful spirit of humanity while real people are out there fighting for their right to eat and for their basic humanity. The studio audience collectively held its breath. The earlier warmth and enthusiasm of the taping had evaporated into an uncomfortable, deafening silence. The nicest man in Hollywood was being systematically destroyed on live television, and the world was watching to see if he would fight back. How do legends react when their very essence is challenged? Nobody in the room expected this. Ron gripped the arms of his chair. The knuckles of his hands turned stark white, almost porcelain. This was the first real break in the armor, the first visible crack in the nice guy mystique that Hollywood so admired. When he finally spoke, his voice was crisp, edged with a sharpness none of us had ever heard in his 50 years in the public eye. Joy, I don't fully understand what you are hoping to achieve here, Ron said, squaring his shoulders at the anchor. But you seem to have a clear intent to portray me as an antagonist purely because I make films that aim to bring people together. That's not a reflection of privilege speaking. That's a reflection of experience. But Joy didn't flinch. It was the first indication of the predatory glint that came to her eyes. She could smell blood in the water. Experience? Is that what we're calling it now? She fired back, a sharp smile dancing across her lips. Is that what we call being a white male that Hollywood has been throwing opportunities at for a lifetime? Is that the experience of never having to fight your way into a room because you were born into it? I've been working since I was 6 years old, Ron retorted. His jaw was tight, and the strain was evident in his voice. I've been in this business for over 50 years. I've seen the business change and I've been a part of it. I've hired more diverse crews, told more inclusive stories than most of my contemporaries. Most of your contemporaries? Joy echoed back, her voice laced with an unmistakable scorn. You hear yourself, Ron? You are grading your own test, but you are grading on such a laughably low curve. So, you're saying you're the better than the other old white guys. That's truly a tough bar to clear, isn't it? The tension in the room was thick enough to taste, and the interview officially crossed the line from tough question to televised trial. Finally, Whoopi Goldberg cut in, her voice dripping with a maternal warning. Joy, let's move on, shall we? And let's actually discuss the film? No, Whoopi, Joy shot back, her gaze still locked with Ron's. This conversation needs to be had. Hollywood likes to give itself a standing ovation every time it takes a step forward, which often only occurs after they've ignored decades of systemic rot. And Ron Howard is the shining example of that mentality. Ron's hands tightened further on his chair, shaking as if with a fever. The man who had braved the roughest sets of Hollywood was teetering on the edge of a cliff on live television. What would you have me say, Joy? He asked, his voice raising in pitch for the first time of the segment. Do you want me to apologize for having a successful career? Do you want me to apologize for telling stories that resonate with millions of people? I'd have you say you are sorry for having benefited off of all the people in this business that have never been given a chance because of their skin color, or because they didn't have the white male connections that you were given from birth. That's not true, Ron said, his voice booming in the sudden, silent studio. I have worked my butt off every single day I've been on Earth, and I have treated every person with respect. And I have always strived to use my work to tell meaningful stories. Ron Howard's career was built on his stoic, professional persona, but the relentless onslaught has finally taken its toll. What happens when the respected man in the room has finally had enough? Find out in the next segment as Ron's reply had the entire industry in shock. The studio erupted into a harsh, jagged laugh that ripped through the air like a saw blade. Worked hard? She taunted. Ron, you went from child star to A-list director without ever having to prove you deserved a chance, the way a woman or a person of color would have to. You consider that working hard? The panelists stared, unable to break the moment. The other co-hosts could do nothing but watch as Joy tore into one of the most respected men in the film industry. Sarah Haynes looked as if she could have been anywhere else, while Sunny Hostin remained intently focused on her notes, the awkwardness in the room now almost palpable. But every man has his breaking point. I prove myself every single day, Ron began, his voice shaking slightly, strained with a controlled rage. Every single one of my films had to stand on its own feet and perform. I was never given a career once I stopped being a child actor and began to age out. I earned this. Right, Joy responded, the venom still dripping in her voice. Because obviously the film industry is nothing but a meritocratic wonderland where talent reigns supreme. Tell me, Ron, how many times in the last 30 years have you recommended a female director for a film? How many people of color have you actually mentored? I've mentored hundreds of young filmmakers, Ron stated, but he didn't even get to finish the sentence. How many? She demanded. Numbers. Give me names. If you are going to argue that you're not the problem here, you had better be able to present the receipts. Ron stared at her, his face turning a deep, unflattering red. The room was silent for a moment, and then Ron spoke. I don't have to justify my entire life's work to you, Joy. I am supposed to be here to talk about my film. I am not on trial. Everything is a trial when you have benefited from an unjust system. Joy retorted immediately. You can't just waltz onto this set, promote your feel-good movie, and pretend that the industry that built your success hasn't been excluding people for centuries. I've never pretended, Ron responded, his voice clearly wavering. But I am not going to be lectured by anyone, and I will not apologize for hard work and the success that I have achieved. If you have a problem with the entire system, then you need to take it up with the system and not with artists. Joy leaned in, her voice dropping to a dangerously low, intense register. Ron, you are the system. You and all the people like you who are gatekeepers in the film industry and have all the say in what stories get made and what stories never see the light of day. When you make a movie about small-town America, whose America are you truly talking about? I'm talking about common human experiences, Ron said, his voice wavering as he tried to sound as calm as possible, but his voice trembled as he spoke, and his entire demeanor began to shift toward that of someone on the defensive. Common human experience, Joy repeated, and the room held its breath for her to respond. The single word seemed to echo off the studio walls. Common human experience. Just a euphemism for what white people see and understand, and what makes them comfortable. Not the truth at all, but a convenient abstraction of reality and experiences that is not inclusive for everyone. The warm atmosphere of the morning show had evaporated, and Ron Howard was squirming as his entire life and work was put under a microscopic lens. But as Joy took the podium to deliver a final damning blow, Ron Howard did the unexpected. Do you think he walked off? Or did he finally say what needed to be said and challenge the very foundation Joy built her narrative upon? Stay right here for the end of this epic showdown. Ron winced, and then, to everyone's astonishment, shook his head. You are misrepresenting everything I'm saying, he said, with a sudden sharpness in his tone. I have made a career from films about gay mathematicians, black jazz musicians, working-class people. How can you tell me that these stories, made through these perspectives, are not a service? Joy did not blink. You've made films for white people, Ron. There's a difference between a contribution and commodification. When you tell somebody else's story through your voice, who gets the credit? Who's getting paid? Who's deciding the narrative? The studio audience was captivated. They were caught in that bizarre and horrifying space between awe and the ghastly, watching the man who they believed to be a universally beloved, uncancelable Hollywood icon be flayed alive on live television. This was Ron Howard, 50 years as America's nice guy, now being portrayed as a villain in a narrative about white privilege and racial injustice. I get paid because I'm the director, Ron said, his patience finally fraying. The actors, the crew, the writers get paid. Every single person that contributed to the film gets paid. That's how filmmaking works. Filmmaking, Joy repeated with a snort of contempt. Or the bottom line? Because if you asked me, it seems like every single argument comes back to money, not art, not societal good, not any kind of responsibility money. It all just comes back to money, and who's making it off the backs of whose pain? Ron's face had turned a deep burning crimson. Joy, what do you want me to do? Should I just stop making films? Should I give all of the money back? What is your goal here? My goal is that you be honest, Joy yelled back, and that you admit that your career was built upon a system that favors your identity above all other identities, and that giving people these feel-good films, even when they are made in an authentic spirit, is still not the goal of art and still contributes to systemic harm. I have brought stories to audiences around the world. I have put thousands of people to work. How is that not a service to the people of this country? Ron screamed. His voice was shaking, raw with a public anger the world rarely witnessed. At that point, the room cracked. Joy slammed her hand down onto the table, and the sound cracked like a whip. Art is not just entertainment, Ron. Entertainment is not a public service when the world is in flames. Your films are like anesthetic. They numb people and stop them from thinking critically about the world. Other hosts in the room leaned in. Whoopi Goldberg cleared her throat, her voice low and firm. Joy, maybe it's time to just take a breath. No, Joy said, her gaze fixed intently on Ron. He's going to answer this. And judging by the expression on his face, he was going to. What does it mean when the nicest man in Hollywood finally snaps? Get ready for the moment that forever shifted the public's perception of Ron Howard. The walk-off that nobody anticipated is on deck. I want to hear him justify it, Joy challenged, her voice laced with sarcasm. I want to hear him justify telling everyone it's all going to be all right when it is very clearly not all going to be all right. That was the last straw. Ron Howard stood up suddenly, eliciting a sharp, gasping intake of breath from the audience. His face was a burning, scarlet red, and his hands trembled, shaking with a rage he had kept inside for the past 50 years. For the first time in half a century, Hollywood's most patient man had lost it completely. You know what, Joy? Ron's voice quivered, yet it had the same unmistakable cadence America has grown to love since his days in Mayberry. I came here today to celebrate the best in people, and all I've gotten is 20 minutes of character assassination from someone who is clearly doing something other than just speaking her mind. Joy's eyes gleamed. She had done it. She had finally broken the seemingly unbreakable Ron Howard. "Oh, so I have an agenda now," she mocked. "What is it, Ron? Holding privileged men accountable for their transgressions?" "Your agenda," Ron responded, his finger now pointing directly at her, "is to tear people down just to make yourself feel significant. You are not concerned with accountability, and you are not concerned with justice. Your only goal is to be the most important person in the room, no matter who you have to step on to get there." The studio was swallowed by a void of stunned silence. Whoopi's jaw had dropped open. Sarah Haynes looked as though she wanted to melt into the floorboards. This was not a discussion about movies anymore. It was a personal, scorched earth war being played out for millions of American living rooms. "Demolish my reputation?" Joy laughed, her laughter a jagged, sharp sound. "You built your reputation on a lie. You told people that you were able to be where you are today purely based on talent alone, that the system works. You, sir, are the embodiment of white mediocrity finally being called out for what it is." Ron's jaw tightened so intensely that the muscles in his face were pulsing. "White mediocrity," he repeated, the words burning on his tongue like acid. "I have received Academy Awards. I have grossed billions of dollars worldwide. I have hired thousands of people, and I have created stories that have touched the hearts of millions. If you consider that mediocrity, then there is simply no standard a human being could ever meet. Those awards were given to you by people who are exactly like you," Joy yelled, her energy matching his intensity. "Those billions of dollars are a direct result of an audience being conditioned to not see your inherent privilege. The bridge had been burnt. The masks had come off. The nicest man in Hollywood was face to face with the most aggressive woman in daytime TV, and neither one of them was budging an inch. What happens when a lifetime of kindness is met head-on with a relentless storm of accusation?" Ron Howard was about to deliver a closing statement that absolutely nobody, not the hosts, not the producers, and definitely not Joy Behar, saw coming. The final explosive few minutes of this epic showdown are next, so stay with us. You think that's what makes me special? Ron stepped towards her, his fists balled tight at his sides. "What makes me special is I've dedicated my entire life, every day, to this craft. I've treated everyone I've ever worked with, from the biggest stars in Hollywood to the craft service team, with respect and dignity. No scandals, no mistreatment, no abuse of power, and that's no different to you than any of that, is it? Because in your eyes, I was born with the wrong skin color. And there it is," Joy squealed, her hands clapping together with mock triumph. "The white victim card? Poor, sweet Ron Howard. To finally be held responsible for all your privilege. The horror. This has nothing to do with privilege," Ron roared, his voice booming through the cavernous rafters of the studio. "This has everything to do with you being a vindictive, hateful creature who gets her jollies by shredding successful men. You failed to make it as a comedian, so you became a professional character assassin." The audience didn't just gasp, they were absolutely silent. The silence was the kind of thick, cloying silence that follows a physical blow. Joy's face went from pale to blood red in a single second, her mouth hanging agape as she struggled to find a response. Ron Howard, the man who'd never uttered an unkind word in 50 years in the public eye, had just nuked national television with his bare hands. "How dare you?" Joy choked out, her voice shaking with rage. "How dare I what?" Ron responded, his voice now a low, cold hiss. "Tell the truth? You make a living tearing people down, Joy. I guess you can't handle the reflection in the mirror. You want to talk about failed careers? Let's talk about yours. Mediocre stand-up turned expert outrage artist. Whoopi Goldberg, sensing the entire show was about to go off the rails, finally managed to stammer out, "Ron, perhaps we all need to take a deep breath here." "No, Whoopi," Ron stated, his eyes never leaving Joy's. "I'm done taking deep breaths. I'm done with all the polite platitudes when a person like this spreads poison on a platform the size of the moon. Do you know what the problem is with this country? It's not successful men telling stories. It's people like Joy who think dismantling someone else's reputation is the same as building something. Joy, tearing someone down is not the same as lifting someone else up." Joy's hands were visibly shaking, the fragile edifice of her persona crumbling. "You don't know anything about me or my career," she stammered, her words barely audible. "I know that you've spent the last 30 minutes trying to destroy a good man's career based on nothing but spite," Ron said calmly. "I know you turned a conversation about art into a character assassination, and I know that millions of people at home have now seen you for exactly who you are, Joy Behar, and it is not pretty." The air in the studio was thick enough to cut with a knife. Ron Howard had done the unthinkable. He'd stopped being the victim and started being the hero by refusing to be a doormat. What happened when the cameras went to commercial? The reverberations of Ron's appearance didn't stop at the studio doors. They spread like wildfire across the nation, and to this day, they rage. Was Ron Howard justified in fighting back, or did he take it too far? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe for more dives into the most explosive Hollywood moments. Just then, Sarah Haynes tried one final effort, desperately seeking to pull the segment out from under the looming crisis. Can we talk about the film itself now?" she requested quietly, her voice almost drowned out by the intense, heavy atmosphere. "There's no point," Ron replied, and then he turned his back to the panel as he walked towards the edge of the set. "This has never been about the film. This has been about Joy wanting to demonstrate that she's a better, more moral person than any of us. Congratulations, Joy. You have demonstrated you will throw a guest in good faith under the bus. Congratulations. I hope it was worth it." But Joy Behar would not let that remark stand. Her voice cracked a little when she yelled back at him as he walked away. "That's right. Run away. That's exactly what wealthy, privileged people do when confronted with reality." Ron stopped in his tracks. He turned slowly to face her one final time. The studio went quiet. You could hear the cameras whirring and turning to capture the unthinkable train wreck on television. "Reality?" Ron inquired, in a quiet, chilled voice that would send shivers down your spine. "I have worked 50 years in this business earning people's respect. The reality is that you have spent 50 years making yourself a brand by beating up people who are not strong. You call that Hansity? The reality is, after this show, everyone's gonna know who's the real problematic person is." "Get out!" Joy screamed, pointing her trembling finger towards the door of the studio. "Just get out!" "I was already leaving," Ron responded, smoothing his jacket to give himself one last boost of dignity. "Good luck explaining yourself to your producers." As Ron Howard exited the stage, the audience began to applaud, a chaotic mixture of cheers and murmurs that suggested they weren't sure what they just watched, but they loved every second of it. Other members of the audience were simply stunned by the public implosion of common decency. Joy Behar stood at the table, chest heaving, hair messy from the intensity of the interaction. The other hosts stood silently behind her, completely stunned. Whoopi Goldberg simply looked to the producers in the wings, her face a mixture of bewilderment and fury. The cameras continued to roll as Joy, with trembling hands, tried to smooth down her blazer and collect herself. "Well," she said, voice raspy, "some people just can't handle tough questions." But the words were flat. They were meaningless in the new, changed energy of the room. What should have been Joy's defining victory over an entitled director was in reality a public relations nightmare. The nice guy of Hollywood had just left the stage, but the conversation was only just getting started. Did Joy Behar cross a line that can never be uncrossed? Or has the director of the most anticipated film of the year just exposed a man who has been putting on a performance for far too long? The internet is already in a war over it, and footage is going viral by the second. Go to the comments and tell me whose side you're on. And be sure to like and subscribe for any further developments and updates in the aftermath of this historic debacle. We'll see you next time. Whoopi Goldberg could no longer hide her discomfort on camera. "We'll be right back," she managed, her voice sounding small and thin. As the bright red tally lights that indicated the cameras were rolling winked off, turning to show that it was time for a commercial break, all the tension in the studio collapsed. Joy slumped back in her chair, finally feeling the crushing weight of the last 20 minutes of the interview descend upon her shoulders. In her pursuit of a gotcha question, Joy had played her hand. She had lunged, and with it, had managed to paint a Hollywood hero as a victim and herself as the abuser. An awkward silence fell over the panel. Each of the hosts looked away and refused to meet one another's eyes, opting to stare intently at their notepads or the floor, as production assistants frantically attempted to figure out what to do for the remainder of the hour. Behind the scenes, the air felt equally heavy. Phone calls were already being made from producers to executives and PR teams. It was no longer an issue of hot topic, but a global, viral-scale catastrophe, where the footage was guaranteed to be endlessly replayed on every news outlet and social media platform in the country. Joy Behar had wanted to incite a heated discussion, but the cost of her win was something that would certainly haunt her for the remainder of her career. In the meantime, somewhere inside the maze of offices within the ABC building, Ron Howard was carefully unpinning the microphone attached to his lapel. After shaking the hands of the wide-eyed and deeply apologetic production staff, he walked toward the door, leaving the studio with his head held high, and his reputation not just intact, but also significantly enhanced. In refusing to accept the label of a doormat, Ron Howard struck a powerful blow to the culture of attack journalism that dominates daytime TV. The View will indeed go on, but the scars of this brutal exchange will take time to heal. Everyone who sat in that studio or was within earshot knows exactly who walked away from that debate a champion. Now, I'm really curious to hear from you. Do you believe that Ron Howard was right to finally break his nice guy image and defend himself, his life's work, and his profession in such a way? Or do you think he should have simply ignored her comments and his own reputation in an effort to defuse the situation? The argument is already hot in the comments. Let's hear from you and be a part of the debate. If you enjoyed this dissection of one of the most iconic television confrontations in history, don't forget to hit subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss our next celebrity drama expose. What iconic television meltdown should we be looking at next? Tell me in the comments, and I'll see you in the next video.